Stop right there. Put your hands where I can see them. What are you doing?
I haven't done anything. These are my receipts. Let go of me.
Stop right there. You're not leaving with that card. The words echoed through the familiar space of a grocery store on a Saturday morning. The sound of the barcode scanner. The rolling wheels of the shopping cart, everything seemed to freeze for a moment. Marcus Sterling stopped. He turned around slowly. Without flinching or panicking, one hand remained on the cart. The other clutched the receipt that had been printed less than 10 seconds earlier. "I paid," he said, his voice low and calm. "I have the receipt. You have no reason to detain me." The officer standing before him didn't flinch. "The manager says this card is stolen. Hand over the card. Now." No one in the store knew they were witnessing the beginning of a $6.5 million legal disaster. No one knew that the man standing at the checkout counter wasn't a suspect. He was a senior federal prosecutor specializing in prosecuting civil rights violations for the U.S. Department of Justice. And the police officer stopping him had inadvertently become the defendant in the most serious case of his career. That morning, there was no chase, no alarm, no evidence of a crime, only an assumption, a prejudice, and a badge used as a weapon. In less than 20 minutes, an ordinary shopping trip would turn into an unlawful arrest. A video that went viral nationwide. An officer stripped of his insignia at the station sitter. And a city forced to bow to federal law. But before we delve into each of the mistakes that led to this collapse, let us know your opinion. Should police be held personally accountable for civil rights violations? And if you're new to this channel, please subscribe. We tell stories the system hopes you'll never hear. Because if even a representative of the federal government isn't safe buying groceries, then the real question is, who is protected? Marcus Sterling isn't the attention-seeking type. At Chinzechi Shipatru, he has the calm demeanor of someone who's seen too much to react impulsively. Shoulders straight. Gait slow. Eyes observant but non-judgmental. He doesn't need to project an image of danger. He never has. For over 25 years, Marcus Sterling has worked within the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Bureau. He's been behind indictments that forced mayors to resign, police chiefs to drop their uniforms, and criminal organizations that believed they were protected to collapse. He's prosecuted hate crimes in the American South, where juries didn't always side with justice. He's broken up human trafficking rings, where victims were often invisible. And he's been the lead prosecutor in cases where law enforcement officers themselves became defendants. Within the Department of Justice, Marcus Sterling was known as the scalpel. Precise. Cold. No superfluous words. He didn't need to raise his voice in the courtroom. Federal law did that for him. But that Saturday morning, Marcus Sterling wasn't a prosecutor. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't carrying a briefcase. He wasn't representing the U.S. government. He was just a man taking a break after years of working in the shadows of the legal system. He had just bought an old house from the 1922nd. A personal project. A way to keep his mind clear after seeing so much injustice. Renovating. Buying things. A normal life. And it was that very ordinariness that made him a target. Because in the eyes of some, a black man shouldn't simply be normal. The grocery store where it all began was on the edge of an affluent neighborhood, where quiet was considered a privilege and security was often interpreted in a very particular way. Bright space, neatly arranged shelves, the smell of freshly roasted coffee and new packaging. This was where familiar shoppers nodded in greeting, where staff knew what a regular customer liked without asking. Marcus Sterling entered the store at about 10 o'clock in the morning. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't sneaky. He pushed his shopping cart naturally, stopping to select items, reading labels, comparing prices. For nearly 40 minutes, Sterling didn't speak to anyone except a staff member at the food counter. He did nothing unusual. No arguing. No drawing attention. But someone was watching him from above. Brett Lee Holloway, the store manager, stood behind the glass of his small office, arms crossed, eyes glued to the security camera screen. At Doazech, she opt. Holloway was promoted rapidly, largely due to family connections rather than practical experience. Holloway saw himself as the store's first line of defense. He believed his job wasn't just to manage the staff, but to spot those who didn't belong. When Holloway saw Marcus Sterling, he didn't look at the behavior. He looked at the man. A black man. A full shopping cart. High total value. In Holloway's mind, the calculation was simple and very wrong. When Sterling placed the card on the checkout counter and pulled out a sleek black credit card, the kind only issued to customers with very high credit limits, the cashier processed the transaction normally. The system accepted the card. Transaction successful. But Holloway didn't wait for confirmation. He picked up the phone. "I need the police immediately," Holloway said to the operator, his voice confident. "I have a suspect using a stolen credit card." The operator asked, "Do you have proof that the card is stolen?" Holloway hesitated, then replied, "He's buying very expensive goods, and he looks very suspicious." It was a lie. Marcus Sterling stood still at the counter, checking his phone, waiting for the receipt to print. Not worried, not running away. But prejudice had done its job. The call was transferred. And, from that moment, everything ceased to be about truth and about power. The call from the store was quickly transferred to dispatch center. The incident code appeared on the screen: suspected credit card fraud, subject still at the scene. 3 miles away, Officer Kyle Richter was patrolling the main thoroughfare leading into the commercial district. When he heard the call, Richter didn't ask questions. He didn't request a detailed description. He didn't ask if the transaction had been approved. In Richter's mind, this wasn't an incident to verify. This was an opportunity to make an arrest. Kyle Richter, Arshidzo, had served in the city police force for 6 years. In uniform. He looked neat, confident, the epitome of an energetic young officer. But beneath that exterior lay a record the personnel department would rather forget. 14 complaints in 6 years. Most concerned rough conduct and unnecessary escalation. He had been formally reprimanded twice by his superiors for failing to control his emotions when interacting with civilians. Richter dismissed those complaints as pointless. In his view, those who complained were simply uncooperative. In Richter's mind, anyone who defied orders was certainly guilty. As his patrol car turned into the store parking lot, Richter switched on his emergency lights and stopped directly in the fire lane. No need for discretion. No need for subtlety. His presence was a message. "I'm here to control the situation." Richter adjusted his belt, glanced quickly at the body camera, a device he considered more of a nuisance than a protective tool, and strode toward the automatic door. Inside the store, Marcus Sterling had finished paying. The cashier smiled, handed him the receipt, and said, "Thank you. Have a good day." Sterling nodded, folded the receipt, and placed his hand on the shopping cart. Just as he turned to walk toward the exit, the automatic door swung open. Kyle Richter walked in. He didn't look for the manager. He didn't speak to the cashier. He didn't ask who had called the police. His eyes quickly scanned the front of the store and stopped instantly. A black man, A full shopping cart. Standing near the entrance, Richter changed direction. He walked straight toward Marcus Sterling. And in that moment, the entire store held its breath. No one knew they were about to witness the beginning of an unlawful arrest. And the inevitable downfall of a police career. Kyle Richter moved so quickly toward Marcus Sterling that he barely had a chance to react. The distance between them narrowed to less than a meter. Richter stood directly in front of the shopping cart, forcing Sterling to stop. One hand rested lightly on the holster. Not drawn, but enough to signal. Power. Threat. Control. "Where do you think you're going?" Richter asked. His voice high and sharp, echoing in the high ceilings of the store. Marcus Sterling stopped completely. He looked directly at the officer, not backing down, but showing no sign of provocation either. "I'm leaving the store," Sterling replied slowly. "I've paid. This is my merchandise." "Really?" Richter smirked. "The manager said you're using a stolen card. Show me your card and ID. Right now." Sterling didn't argue with the tone. He didn't react with contempt. Instead, he did what most people wouldn't do in this situation. He asked a legal question. "Officer," Sterling said, turning to face Richter completely, "what crime am I being held on suspicion of? Do you have any reasonable and specific suspicion that I have violated the law?" That question struck Richter's raw nerve. He heard no cooperation. He heard defiance. "You have no right to ask me that." Richter snapped. "I'm investigating. Follow my orders." Sterling maintained his calm tone. "The law requires reasonable suspicion before detention. If you don't have that, I'm not obligated to provide any documents." The people around them began to pause. A few phones were pulled from their pockets. Richter felt the gaze of the crowd, and in his mind, his power was being challenged right in front of the public. This was the moment when everything could stop. Just one step back. One verification. One call to superiors. But Kyle Richter didn't back down. He took another step forward. And his next decision would close all escape routes completely. The atmosphere in the store had changed. The usual noises, barcode scanners. Shopping cart wheels faded away. All eyes were on the two men standing opposite each other in the aisle. Kyle Richter sensed it all. And to him, this was no longer a check. It was a matter of authority. "You are being held," Richter said loudly, his voice defiant. "Suspected of credit card fraud and theft. Now, show me your identification. Otherwise, you will be handcuffed." Marsham Sterling took a slow breath. He understood just how important this moment was. He also understood that, for some officers, a citizen's knowledge of the law was not something to be respected, something to be crushed. "Officer," Sterling said, his voice low and more serious, "I advise you to stop and think. I am a senior federal prosecutor in charge of civil rights. My papers are in my wallet. You can verify them immediately." A few people in the shop murmured softly, but Richter laughed. A short, dry, sarcastic laugh. "That's right," he said. "You're always pretending to be lawyers, doctors, or some important person." Sterling's expression didn't change. "This isn't a story," he replied. "This is the truth. Call your shift supervisor. Don't touch me." That was the final warning. A clear legal escape route opened up, but Kyle Richter decided not to see it. In his mind, the man before him was stalling, challenging, humiliating him. And Richter reacted the way he always did. With force. He stepped forward, grabbed Sterling's left wrist, and twisted it sharply behind his back. The sudden, unnecessary twist made Sterling wince slightly. I am not resisting, Sterling said clearly, turning his face toward the cameras recording. I am obeying this officer's unlawful orders. But Richter didn't stop. He shoved Sterling toward the counter, his chest slamming against the metal tabletop. The sound echoed sharply in the silent space. Stop resisting, Richter yelled. I am not resisting, Sterling repeated, his voice calm but cold. In that moment, there was no longer any doubt. This wasn't law enforcement. This was blatant abuse of power, recorded every second, and slowly condemning itself. Kyle Richter yanked Marcus Sterling's other arm, twisting it behind his back with completely unnecessary force. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed dryly in the heavy silence of the store. Click. The handcuffs tightened around Sterling's wrists. Too tight. Sterling took a deep breath, maintaining his balance, neither resisting nor struggling. He knew one thing for sure: any movement now would be used as an excuse. I am not resisting, he said clearly, word by word, turning his face toward the telephones pointed at him. I am handcuffed without legal basis. I am Marcus Sterling, United States Department of Justice. Richter didn't reply. He pushed Sterling around, pressing him against the counter. One hand gripped his shoulder. The other began a rough search. His wallet was yanked from his back pocket and tossed onto the counter. Richter opened the wallet. Inside were cards familiar to anyone who had ever worked with the federal government. A heavy metal badge, engraved with the seal of the Department of Justice. A service card with a photo, signature, and holographic stamp. Richter glanced at them, just for a second. Then he smirked. A fake, Richter said, his voice full of contempt. The prop looks pretty good. He folded the wallet and tossed it onto the counter like trash. That moment was the moment all paths of turning back vanished. Not because Sterling was a prosecutor, but because Richter had just refused to verify the validity of federal documents right in front of the cameras. Sterling slowly turned his head. You've just thrown away federal property, he said, his voice even but cold. You're violating Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, Disinheritance in the Name of Law. Richter began reading Miranda's statement, his tone dramatic, as if savoring the moment. You have the right to remain silent. Sterling said nothing more. He was silent, not out of fear. He was silent because everything necessary had been recorded. Abuse of power, unnecessary violence, and blatant disregard for federal law. As Richter pulled Sterling out of the store, Manager Brett Holloway stood nearby, arms crossed, nodding with satisfaction. Thank you, officer, Holloway said. You're welcome, Richter replied. We're done. Marcus Sterling walked away in handcuffs, back straight, head held high. He was no longer a customer. He had become a prosecutor, gathering evidence for the most important case of Kyle Richter's career. The patrol car slammed its rear door shut. Marcus Sterling sat upright in the back seat, his wrists still locked in cold metal handcuffs. A sharp pain spread from his wrists up his arms. But he showed no sign of discomfort. He concentrated. Sterling memorized every detail the time they left the store. The patrol car's license plate reflected in the window. The officer's tone when he contacted the dispatcher. In front of him, Kyle Richter turned on the radio. The suspect has been apprehended, Richter said, his voice confident. Male. Suspected credit card fraud. Resisting arrest. Carrying a counterfeit federal badge. Sterling closed his eyes briefly, not out of despair, but because he understood the legal implications of each word, every sentence Richter uttered on the radio. was a brick building the very wall that would implicate him. The ride lasted nearly 20 minutes. Throughout the journey, Richter couldn't hide his triumph. So quiet now, he glanced in the rearview mirror. No more lawyer tricks. Sterling looked straight ahead. "I'm waiting for your lawyer," he replied curtly. Richter sneered. "You'll be waiting a long time." When the car stopped in front of the police station, Richter opened the back door and pulled Sterling out. It wasn't necessary. Not gentle at all. He was led through the back door, across the detention area, where curious eyes followed. They stopped in front of the reception desk. The officer on duty was Sergeant Thomas Miller, a man of nearly 30 years in the force. Gray hair, the weary eyes of someone who had witnessed all kinds of wrongdoing. Miller looked up. "What do we have here?" he asked. "Credit card fraud." Richter answered immediately. "He's resisting arrest and carrying a fake federal badge. He claims to be a prosecutor." Richter tossed Sterling's wallet onto the table. Miller opened the wallet. It took less than 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds were enough to change everything. Miller looked at the badge, then at the official ID, then at the name. Marcus A. Sterling, Senior Federal Prosecutor, Civil Rights Division. A cold sweat ran down Miller's spine. He looked up, staring directly at Sterling. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Miller turned to Richter, his voice low. "RTOR, have you verified these things?" Richter shrugged. "It's obviously fake. Who would carry that while shopping?" Miller closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Remove the handcuffs. Now." The atmosphere in the room froze. Kyle Richter stood motionless. And for the first time since walking into the store that morning, he began to realize he had arrested the wrong person. "Remove the handcuffs. Now." Sergeant Miller's voice was no longer suggestive. It was an order. Kyle Richter froze, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "Wait, sir." Richter stammered. "We haven't verified." "You have verified." Miller interrupted, pointing to the open wallet on the table. "And you were wrong." Miller walked around the reception desk, pulling the keys from his belt. The sound of metal clashing echoed dryly in the quiet room. He bent down and unlocked Marcus Sterling's handcuffs. Click. Sterling rubbed his wrists. 2 dark red marks were clearly visible on his skin. He didn't complain of pain. He showed no sign of triumph. He just stared straight at Richter. "Don't apologize for him," Sterling said to Miller, his voice calm but cold. "I want this officer's badge number. I want his body camera sealed immediately. And I want the shift commander here." Richter opened his mouth to say something. Miller turned to him, his eyes cold. Silence. In less than 3 minutes, the usually noisy duty room became suffocatingly tense. The other officers began to avoid eye contact, pretending to be busy with paperwork, as if a single misjudgment could drag them into this storm. The double doors swung open. Lieutenant David Vance, the shift commander, entered hurriedly. At 45, Vance understood the political consequences of every decision at the station. With just one glance, he knew how serious the situation was. "Mr. Sterling," Vance said, his hands outstretched as if to reassure him. "I sincerely apologize for this. We can talk privately." "No." Sterling interrupted. "This is not a misunderstanding." He turned, pointing directly at Kyle Richter. "This officer has arrested me without legal basis. He has used violence against a cooperating officer, and he has refused to verify my federal credentials due to racial prejudice." Richter trembled. "Lieutenant, no more words." Vance snapped. Not now. Sterling continued, his voice echoing through the room. I officially announce I will sue. I will request a criminal investigation. And I request that this officer be stripped of his insignia and weapon right here and now. Vance hesitated for a second. Then he understood. This was no longer an internal matter. This was federal. Richter, Vance said slowly, put your gun and badge on the table. Kyle Richter stood frozen, his hands trembling. He unfastened the sling, placing the Glock down on the table. Then he removed the badge from his chest. The sound of metal hitting the table echoed soft, but enough to end a career. The following Monday morning, the story was no longer confined to a local police station. It had become a federal issue. Video of the arrest was uploaded to social media Saturday night. By Sunday noon, the clip had surpassed 1 million views. Every detail was clear, Marcus Sterling's calm voice, Kyle Richter's aggression, and the moment the officer tossed his federal badge onto the counter, when Sterling's identity was confirmed, public outrage erupted. Civil rights prosecutor arrested just for shopping. Abuse of power and prejudice at the grocery store. But Sterling didn't respond to the press. He did what he always did. He filed a lawsuit. The federal lawsuit was coldly worded. Sterling wasn't just suing Kyle Richter personally. He was suing the city, the police department, and the store management for conspiring to create an unlawful arrest. The allegations included violations of the Fourth Amendment, unlawful detention, assault, and discrimination in violation of the 14th Amendment times. But the most powerful blow came in the discovery of evidence. Sterling requested the full record of Kyle Richter's complaints. The results were shocking. 18 complaints in 6 years. 12 from black people. All had been internally dismissed. He went on to request the 911 call logs from the store. Brett Holloway, the manager, had called the police 6 times in 8 months, all targeting black customers. Not a single one resulted in prosecution. This was no longer an incident. This was a pattern of behavior. And once that pattern was exposed in federal court, it could no longer be concealed. As documents began to be released during the proceedings, the atmosphere at City Hall became tense. What had once been buried in internal files now lay on the desks of federal lawyers. It was undeniable. It couldn't be erased. The city tried to control the damage. They offered an early settlement, $2 million, to settle the matter quietly. No admission of wrongdoing. No mandatory reforms. No legal precedent. Marcus Sterling refused. He wasn't seeking money to close the story. He was seeking accountability. This wasn't an accident. Sterling's legal team told the judge, "This is the inevitable result of a system that tolerates wrongdoing." The pressure mounted daily. The city council feared a public trial, where a federal civil rights prosecutor would stand before a jury and explain in detail how their police had violated the Constitution. Ultimately, they backed down. 6 months after the arrest, the deal was struck. $5 million in restitution. A formal admission of civil rights violations. A commitment to reform police recruitment, training, and disciplinary processes under federal oversight. Kyle Richter was no longer an officer under investigation. He was fired. His license was permanently revoked, and he was criminally prosecuted for assault and deprivation of civil rights in the name of the law. To avoid jail time, Richter pleaded guilty. 3 years of probation. A criminal record that would follow him for life. No more badges. No more power. Only a record. As for Brett Holloway, the store manager, he was fired for violating the anti-discrimination policy. His name became synonymous with prime examples of racial profiling in the retail industry. The system finally spoke out, but the price paid was years of silence beforehand. After the agreement was announced, Marcus Sterling virtually disappeared from the media spotlight. He didn't hold a celebratory press conference. He didn't give lengthy interviews. He didn't capitalize on the fame from the incident. He returned to his work quietly, regularly, and steadfastly as before. Only once. In a rare, brief interview, did Marcus Sterling sit in the living room of the house where he had been arrested while buying repair supplies. New plumbing had been installed behind the wall. The flooring had been replaced. The house was finished. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Justice has been served in my case, but I am the exception." He paused for a few seconds. "I am trained to remain calm. I have the knowledge to know what rights are being violated. I have the standing and resources to fight back." Then he said something that silenced the room. "If I were a 19-year-old student, or a mechanic, or a teacher, that officer could have broken my arm. He could have planted evidence. He could have ruined my life and nobody would know." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "The system protected me because I was part of the system, and that's the tragedy." This story isn't just about Kyle Richter. It's not just about Brett Holloway. And it's not just about one store or one city. It's about how many people like Richter are still on patrol, and how many people like Sterling, without the gold badge in their pocket, are sitting in jail right now. If a federal civil rights prosecutor isn't safe going shopping on Saturday morning, then who is truly protected? What changes do we need to make to prevent this from happening again? Personal accountability of police officers, mandatory civil liability insurance, or criminalizing racially motivated 911 calls a year? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you believe these stories need to be told, please like and share. Be cautious. Protect each other. And we'll see you again in the next story.